All right, it is time to talk about pyridostigmine and whether some people with ME/CFS are suffering from problems with acetylcholine. There's a small clinical study that just came out that shows pyridostigmine may help with muscle weakness and maybe orthostatic intolerance in ME/CFS. So, of course, we need to look through this study and see what it tells us about treating ME/CFS. First, let me give you the quick idea behind the treatment. There's a hypothesis that individuals with ME/CFS have insufficient acetylcholine activity or cholinergic activity. Acetylcholine is required for muscle activity and control of muscle activity, so low levels will make you weak. It's also important in cardiovascular adaptations as you change posture, like when you're lying down to standing up. It's also critical for cognition, so remembering and thinking and concentrating and learning, and a dozen other critical processes of your body. So the role of acetylcholine is so expansive in the body that low levels of just that one neurotransmitter can profoundly affect pretty much all the body systems and cause complete debilitation. So it is a logical thing to look at. If that's happening in ME/CFS and the acetylcholine levels are low, one way to combat that is to give a treatment that will increase the acetylcholine levels in the synapses between the neurons. And the best example of that type of drug is pyridostigmine or mestinon, which is the commercial name in the US. And pyridostigmine works by inhibiting the enzyme that breaks acetylcholine down. So it's a cholinesterase inhibitor. And by keeping this enzyme from breaking acetylcholine down, you increase the levels of acetylcholine. Now that makes sense, but does it actually help ME/CFS? So the new clinical study was conducted by a group out of Berlin, Germany, and the title is Pyridostigmine Improves Hand Grip Strength in Patients with Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. This is an open access paper, so feel free to download it yourself at the link that I put in the video description below. This is a small study with 20 individuals, so it's designed just to tell the research teams whether this line of research deserves further attention. It's not large enough to support a change in medical decisions. And this was all done in a clinic. They used a single 30 milligram dose of pyridostigmine, and the main test was a hand grip strength test, which you can use a device such as this one. You basically grip as hard as you can, and that force is recorded in kilograms. Then you wait 5 seconds and you do it again, and you do that 10 times. So there's 10 repetitions of the hand grip strength test. Now, if a healthy individual does this and they grip it and then they do it again and again and again 10 times, they will probably get approximately the same number of grip strength in kilograms each time. And so if you plotted their repetitions, their 10 repetitions, you'd get pretty much a straight line that shows that nothing changes with the repeated attempts. But if someone with ME/CFS tries this and they do it 10 times, they'll find their strength decreasing every time they repeat the task. And so they have a declining line of grip strength, and we call that fatigability, which is an abnormal decrease of performance. It could be physical or mental with repeated or sustained effort. So that's what this task is measuring. The question is, can pyridostigmine block that decrease in performance that we see in ME/CFS? All right, let's find out. So they brought in 20 people, 13 females and 7 males. They met the Canadian consensus criteria, the CCC criteria for ME/CFS. Each participant came to the clinic twice. In the first visit, they did the grip strength 10 times. You hold it for 3 seconds, rest for 5 seconds, then hold for 3 seconds, rest for 5, each grip being recorded. And they do that again for a total of 10 reps. Then they rest for an hour. and then they do the 10 repetitions one more time. And there's no medication in this first visit. They just do the entire 10 repetition twice, separated by an hour. Now let's look at those results first. Basically, we see what I imagine the research team was expecting, which we see the declining grip strength over the 10 repetitions. And then when they repeat that same thing an hour later, we see the same declining strength with each repetition. So the team basically verified that people with ME/CFS have declining performance with repeated assessments. So the participants then came to the clinic a second time, and they did the same thing, except this time they did the test with the 10 repetitions. Then they took the pyridostigmine, and then they did the test again. And we want to see if there's a difference between those two. So we see here their test showed, at least the first test they did that day, showed the same general declining strength as we saw in their first visit. Nothing strange there. Then they took the pyridostigmine and they waited an hour. Now, when they do the strength test, we don't see the declining performance. It looks more level. It looks more similar to what we might expect in a healthy individual who doesn't have ME/CFS. So after taking the medication, the ME/CFS participants did not show muscle weakness after repeated grip tests. And that is very interesting. Now, they also, just as kind of a side note, they also did a standing task, which was to investigate orthostatic intolerance by measuring abnormal heart rate increases when you stand up. But 7 out of 20 of the participants refused to do that task because they were afraid that it would exacerbate their symptoms. And so that's a loss of too many. I'm not going to discuss that task, but it is interesting they did it. And they do have some interesting results with that. So if you're interested in that orthostatic test, you can find that in the full paper if you're interested. But I will say again that the grip strength test is definitely the core, the central idea of this paper. So what do I think about the paper? There's not too much for me to say. It's a nice little study. It's a good design. The results, I think, are easy to interpret. Most of the issues that I could raise are tied to the small sample size of a preliminary study like this. Nothing strange there. The only true large concern that I have to raise is the lack of a placebo control, which is an issue that the research team notes in the paper. They're full aware that that's a problem. The issue is someone could look at these results and they could argue that since all the participants knew when they were receiving the treatment, they may have just tried harder after that. And so the improvement could be a placebo effect, or more likely, it could be partially a placebo effect. And the only way to know for sure whether the improvement is due to the drug is to have the study be placebo controlled and double blind. So I imagine if they do a larger version of the study, they will have a sham treatment to make absolutely sure that any improvements they see can be attributed specifically to the pyridostigmine. But anyway, it's common to have your first small study be open label, and then you have more strict controls and more placebo controls added in subsequent studies when there's more grant money available. So overall, very interesting. You're definitely going to hear more about pyridostigmine for ME/CFS in the next few months and maybe year or two. There's a larger trial currently going on with the Open Medicine Foundation. I've spoke about that before. They're testing this treatment as part of their ME/CFS study called LIFT, and it'll be very interesting to see what they get. Now, what about you taking pyridostigmine right now? I'm not a physician, so it's not my place to say. I think most physicians, I'm just guessing, most physicians will be reluctant to prescribe this medication for ME/CFS right now. Maybe it's more likely if you have symptoms of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or POTS, or if you have some other evidence of abnormal acetylcholine functioning. And certainly if you have autoantibodies, you can do a blood test for that. if you have antibodies for acetylcholine receptors, like asthenia gravis, and there are specialty ME/CFS clinics where this medication could be prescribed or more likely to be prescribed as well. So there are a few places, depending on your situation, where you might get it. But for most people, it's probably best to wait for the results of ongoing trials. This treatment has risks if it's taken by the wrong people or at the wrong dose. It's possible to increase your acetylcholine too much, which can cause many adverse side effects or even a cholinergic crisis. So, proper diagnosis, monitoring the side effects, and monitoring the dose that requires a physician. In other words, it's a bad idea to self prescribe and self monitor this treatment. So that's it for today. Another intriguing possible tool for treating ME/CFS. I will be back soon with some more science. I do have a large grant application deadline next week. So I may have to skip 1 week of videos. So if I don't post a video next Monday, that's the reason why. We'll see how fast I get all the writing done. So congrats to the German team for the interesting study. And thank you all for listening.